So that kind of does what we want, right? Let's do a quick commit on that. Add exact route match. All right. So that handles when we're not looking up a user. But when we are looking up a user, we need, so we've already got this username stored in state, right? Because every time we type something in, that onChange handler runs, and that so state is getting updated every time we add a new character. So it knows that this is the current state.username. When we submit it, we want it to take that, add it to the URL, and then render this user details component or whatever you want to call it, right? So, first step is how do we take what's in this .state when we submit and get it in the URL? So remember, when you're in the router, now that our app is nested in router, every component automatically gets those three properties, those three props. There's the history, location, and the match objects. So every single component will get those three. Remember which one has the methods we want to be able to push to a new location? It's fine if you don't. I know this is all a lot of new stuff all in one day. So the history object has the method of push. So we can push to a new location. So one way to navigate is with links. If you want to navigate programmatically, you can use the history object to manipulate where you are. So what we want is on submit, we want to take whatever's in the state.username and push to that location. Make sense? So if I'm going to add an on submit handler, we'll do that on the form. And we'll just make a handle submit function. Which, just like any event handler, gets the event. What's the first thing I need to do on a submit if I don't want it to do the default thing? Prevent default. We don't want to refresh the page. We want to stay in our React app. All right. So we prevent the default. And now, let's take a look here. So we should be able to. That's the wrong one. So if we look at our GitHub component, you can see I've got these three props. So the history, location, and match. And we said we're going to use history, right? And it's got this push method. So we can do that. So if we do this .props .history.push, and push just takes a string parameter of where you want it to go to. I'm going to use backticks because we want to tell it what the username is, right? So in this one, our URL is /github/ the username, right? So /github is always going to be the first part. And then, how could I get the username in there? Yeah. You could do that, yeah. You could get it from the form directly. We're already storing it on state though, right? Yeah, so we could just get it directly from that. So either way would work, yeah. I hadn't thought about doing it the other way, but we could totally do that. But since we already have it on state, we might as well use that. So that way we're not reliant on the DOM at all, we're reliant on our React component. And let's see if that will change our URL now. Oh, gather. All right, so if you put that in there, yeah, totally worked. Nice. So you notice our original message that says enter a GitHub username goes away because we're no longer an exact match. And we have now added that to our path. Seems worth a commit. Push to new location on submit. All right, so now we've made it to a new location, but we don't have a route that matches that yet, right? So we probably need to add another one. So just go back to our GitHub one, and we're going to add another route. And what's my path equal this time? I already know the first part's /GitHub, right? What's the other part? What's that? Kind of, URLs are a little bit different. You remember how we had the params that we talked about in the presentation? You remember how we showed that in the URL? Yeah, may not be something you're used to. If we just preface it with a colon, and that's a symbol that's going to stand in for whatever we pass it as the second thing. So if that's our path, /GitHub, and then something that we're going to assign to params.username, we want to render, or just have it render a component that is, I don't know, what should we call it? GitHub user. So that blows up. Why does it blow up? We haven't made that component yet, so we should probably do that. New file. GitHub user.js. Do our normal imports. And for now, let's just put something simple in the render method so we can see that it's working. And last but not least, we need to import it into our GitHub component so we can use it. Hooray. Everybody make it that far? Cool. So let's take a look at this component. So again, if I look up the GitHub user component, you can see I've still got these same 3 props because we didn't explicitly pass any props to it, but just because it's part of within the context of the router, it gets these 3, the history, location, and match. So the one we're interested in now is the params because we need to get this information into that component. So on our match props, you got the params, and you can see it's got username, winrcm, right? So because our path was /github/username, it made this params with username of whatever we passed it here. Does that make sense? Cool. So we could even say, if you wanted to, this.props.match username. And theoretically, that should not work. What'd I break? So props. Oh, params. Forgot that part. Oh, match.params. Sorry. There we go. Cool. So we use our form to get that information to here to render a different route, different component. And inside that component, we can access the match props that are passed to it by the router to get that same information back out. So that's cool. Quick commit there. Add route and component for GitHub user. All right, so we made it to this component. We know we have access to the username, but what do we actually want to do? We want to actually talk to GitHub and get some information, right? Based on what the username is. So, time to use our fetch method. So I guess the biggest question I have initially is, when do we want the fetch method to run? Do we want it to run after it's been loaded for 5 minutes? 20 minutes? Yeah, like as soon as we load it up, right? And so where do we call things that run as soon as we load up a component? Perhaps when the component is being constructed? Yeah. No, not an event listener, but when the component itself is made. So any class, when it's initialized, runs the constructor method. So that'd probably be a good place to do our initial fetch. So let's go ahead and put the constructor in here. Takes our props, call super with the props, and then we can call something called like maybe fetch user data. Always try to name your methods something that makes sense. So later on when you read it, it makes sense to you. And then obviously we'll need to make our fetch user data method. All right, so let's prove that this runs when we load up. We'll just log something in the console so we can see it. So if I go back to just /GitHub, enter a username, And you'll see I get my fetch down here. All right, cool. So that runs. But we need to actually fetch. So let's figure out how to use the GitHub API. Oh, how convenient. They have a nice website for the GitHub API. So a lot of public APIs are pretty well documented. And then it just basically tells you what endpoints they have, what URLs you can use to get various information from them. What we're looking for is just a single user, right? So if we look through here, got this whole menu over here. Oh, look, users. Super. Let's go there. Oh, get a single user. How nice. So if we're at the base URL and then for the GitHub API and we add /users/username, oh, that looks a lot like the parameter we just used, right? Then we should be able to get one. Seems easy enough. So their base level API is at api.github.com. So all we'll have to do is take this part, add /users, and then whatever username we're looking for, and that should give us the data we're looking for. Make sense? So remember, fetch, the actual fetch method is globally available, so we can just say fetch. And then we just need to pass it the string of the URL we're trying to get to, or get information from. So that was https://api.github.com. And then it was /users, and then / the username, right? And how do I get the username? We're already rendering it, right? Remember, we just put that here. So I can just copy this and put it up there. So as soon as this component gets loaded up, it's going to get constructed. The constructor calls fetch user data. That's going to call fetch to this URL where we're going to pass in the username that was passed in with the props. And that's asynchronous, so who knows when we'll actually get a response. But to do asynchronous promise-based stuff, we just do that then. And we're going to get a response back. And we want to parse that JSON. And then, once it's parsed, so .then again, where you can just chain stuff on. We're getting that user data, that user object back. And for now, let's just console log it and see what that looks like. So it already refreshed. So you can see we're still rendering the same thing because we didn't change that. But our constructor ran, we ran the fetch method, and now we got the response back, parsed it as JSON. And now I've got this object that has all sorts of useful information. This looks like you can get my avatar picture, which is one of the things we wanted, right? We got followers, how many people I'm following, location, login was part of it. We've also got the URL to, where is it? Somewhere around here. Not the API one. There it is, HTML URL, so the actual link to the website. Cool, so it looks like we can definitely get this full object. So that was pretty easy, right? Nice. Let's commit that. Fetch GitHub user data. on component load. So we've got the data. Where should we store it so that we can render it? State. Good choice. So let's initialize our state here. Let's give it a user property. And then which properties do we actually need? So we got this whole list of stuff. But I don't think we need all this stuff, right? That's a lot. But we did say we want the avatar, right? So we should probably get the avatar URL. And what should it be when we first load the page? Blank string. What else do we need? We need the login. What else do we have? Followers. Following. Location was one, right? And the link to their actual GitHub account, right? I think that was everything, isn't it? Sounds about right. And then down here, we don't want to render this anymore. We want, let's go ahead and make a div so everything can be a child of that div. Let's give it a class of GitHub user. First thing, let's do the image tag. And our source is going to be state.user.avatar URL, right? So let's get rid of the string. And actually, just so we don't have to type this .state so many times, let's do, we've seen this a couple times when we were doing thing list. We can just take the user out of this .state and assign it to the variable user. So that way we can just say user.avatar URL instead of having typed this .state.user.avatar URL, because that would get real boring. We can do an H2 with the login. Let's see what else. Followers. Following. One for location. And then a link to, and this one we do actually want to go outside of our current app because it's actually going to link through to GitHub. So it'll be a normal A tag. Does anybody know what this target underscore does? Yeah. Different page. Yeah. So it'll open it in a new window. So that way you don't leave your current page. It's going to open a new tab. Link to. All right. Let's see what happens. Not a whole lot. We got our fields, but no real information. Why is that? What are we doing currently with the information we got back from GitHub? We're just console logging it, right? That doesn't help us. We need to actually change state, right? So let's do overwrite our current user object with the one we got back. Make sense? I guess overwrite's not the right word, but replace state with a new state that has the new user object. Oh my goodness. Look at that. So feel free to look up your own name or the names of friends and family members. And let's say we make that look a little prettier. Actually, first let's commit that because that was a pretty big step. Add user to state and render user details. Yep. All right. So we need a CSS file, right? And these rules are actually pretty simple, so I'm just going to type them. So our class that we had, what do we call it? Just GitHub-user. For the image, let's make it round, so border radius 50%. And it's also pretty big, so let's make it not quite so big. Let's just set a height of 200 pixels. And then for the H3s, let's just make them a dark gray instead of black. That'll probably look nice. So that border radius thing is a trick you can use pretty easily to make anything round. So if my radius is 50% of the width or height or whatever, then obviously that makes it round. And then we just need to import our style sheet into the component. Nope, not that one. That's CSS. There we go. That's lovely. And actually, you notice how we can't scroll down very far? I don't like that. We need some bottom margin. Let's see. Probably should put that on the app as a whole. Let's go to app CSS. And give it like 30 pixels of bottom margin. There we go. Now that's not crammed against the bottom of the page. All right, commit that. Style GitHub user. All right, so just a quick recap from the top, because I know that's a lot of new concepts today. So index.js, our very top level thing. We imported browser router as router, and we wrapped our app inside the router component. So now everything in our whole app is under the control of the router. In app.js, we made our header, and we also made our nav links. The links just have a to property that say where they're going to go to when you click on them. Nav links are so they also get the active class when they're active, so we can style them differently. At the bottom of the page, we've got a switch statement that lets us define some routes and also basically a default route. So our default was just one that says to get started, click on one of the links above. So far, we've just added one route, the GitHub route. So when our path matches /GitHub, it knows to render the GitHub component. When this component loads, it just has the form and the button. And its default, when it's an exact match of /GitHub, is to say, please enter a username to search. We tied the value of the input to our state. And then when we submit, our onSubmit handler prevents default and then looks at the history object and pushes us to a new location where it's passing the username as a param. When that happens, we no longer do an exact match here, but we do match this path, and it knows to render GitHub user. On initial load, GitHub user calls fetch user data, which uses the global fetch method to call the GitHub API. When it gets that response, it parses the JSON, sets the state of the user, and then it just gets rendered in the normal output. Make sense? Not too hard, just several concepts, but we're going to practice them. So let's talk a little bit about homework. Originally, I thought we would get through both of these, but it's kind of good that we didn't since the NASA one wasn't working. I'm curious if it is working now. Oh, this is not the full one. Nope, still not working. Yeah, so we're over the rate limit. We got the 429 error. So I will add the NASA route for you and push that up. It's pretty similar, honestly. There's a couple different things because we're using a second set of links instead of an input field, but generally in terms of how they work. Oh, wait, I almost forgot one thing. This is important. Sorry, not done yet. What happens currently when, let's say, I type in my name, I get that. What if I type in that one? My URL changed. Why didn't I get new information? When does this information get loaded? When the component's constructed, right? Did we construct a new component? Nope. So we got to somehow tell it to refetch, not just when it's constructed, but also when the URL changes, right? So same match, but the URL has changed. So we've used a couple lifecycle hooks so far, like component will mount, stuff like that, right? So there's one called component will receive props. Basically meaning the props are changing, and so it's going to receive some new ones. So that seems like a good time to run that, right? Because we're going to get new match props because our match has just changed. So let's go ahead and do that. Sorry, you were all excited about wrapping up. We're almost done, I promise. Let's do component will receive props. And it gets an argument of next props. So at this point, The component's hanging out. It's got its current props, which you can access through this.props. Something else where it gets updated. And so this component's parent component is like, hey, I'm about to send you some new props. And he's like, cool, what are they? I'm like, here, I call them next props. So they've not been updated yet. I have not changed my this.props, but I get to see like a sneak preview of what my new props are going to be. So what we can do with that is we can compare the props that I currently have and the props that I'm going to get and see if what's changed is the thing I'm looking for, which is basically the location, right? So like where I'm at in the URL location. So if that's changed, then we want to rerun the fetch. So we can say location changed equals next props dot location does not equal this dot props dot location. You can do parentheses if you want, if that makes it easier to understand, but it'll run the same either way. So this is going to evaluate to a Boolean because either it's equal or not equal. So it's going to be true or false. And I'm going to assign that to the location changed variable. But yeah, it'll... So then I can say if location changed, then I want to fetch user data again, right? Think it'll work? Take a vote. Let's find out. So currently we're here. If I look up my information instead, let's look up Davey. We've been looking up these two for a while. Oh no, still didn't work. Anybody have a guess why? Yeah. So when we run fetch user data, we're running it using this dot props. My props haven't changed yet. I got a sneak peek of what my props will be, but I'm still running it off my current props. So we can just pass it as a parameter to the method. Instead, so now if I pass the next props, then I'm not waiting on those to change. I'm just passing it in and then calling it off those, meaning where else do I need to change it? When this gets called in the constructor, what are props going to be? Not going to have anything passed in, right? So we're going to need to explicitly pass them in there as well. So in the case when the component is first being constructed, we're calling fetch user data with our initial props. When the location is changing, then we're specifically calling next props, so we get the updated ones. And so this just takes a parameter of props, and so we're calling it on whichever one we get, whether that's the current one or the new one. Make sense? Probably work, right? Maybe. Oh man, that's horrible timing. We just got rate limited. So the GitHub API, if you're not using an actual like secret key for that or API key for that, eventually if you make too many requests from the same IP address, it'll rate limit you and stop giving you information. So trust me, this works. But also a good time to stop, right? So let's just commit that last little thing. Run fetch with new props when location changes.